Over the last weeks, I've extensively tested the new Fitbit Versa 4 alongside its more expensive brother, the Sense 2. And in this video, we will take a comprehensive look at the heart rate accuracy, sleep tracking performance, GPS tracking, and step counting accuracy of this brand new watch from Fitbit. Now, as always, my videos are not about listing the specs, but instead we will focus on independent and unbiased performance testing of this new Fitbit watch. Hello everyone, for those of you that are new to the channel, my name is Rob and I'm a postdoctoral scientist specializing in biological data analysis. Now, like I said, I'm not gonna list the specs of this watch for you. However, I did want to make two remarks before getting to the test results. The first is that the Versa 4 looks very similar to the Sense 2, and the main difference between the two is that the Fitbit Sense 2 has a few additional health tracking features. Specifically, the Sense 2 can measure your electrodermal activity and thereby help with stress management. And it can also take an ECG measurement to potentially detect a type of irregular heart rhythm called atrial fibrillation, or AFib in short. And finally, it will measure your skin temperature changes between nights, which could help you track your menstrual cycle or the onset of a fever. The second thing I want to mention is the pricing. The Fitbit Versa 4 will set you back about $230, whereas the Sense 2 is slightly more expensive at $300. If you do decide that you want to buy one of these two watches, I would base it on both the test results I'm going to show you here and also if you actually need the additional features that the Sense 2 offers. Now, let's dive into those test results, and let's start off with the heart rate tracking accuracy, since this is probably one of the most important features for people buying a health tracker. Now, I tested this during a total of 18 workout sessions. To test that, I'll compare the heart rate measurements of the Fitbit Versa 4 against the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, which can generally record my heart rate very accurately. We'll start by looking at one of the easiest types of exercises for a watch to track, cycling indoors. And I'll be looking at a total of 4 interval spinning sessions. Now, this involves very little movement or tension on my arms and will therefore produce less noise. And here we can see an overview of that accuracy over several rides. Each dot here is a single heart rate measurement, with on the horizontal axis the value according to the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, and on the vertical axis the value according to the Versa 4. The closer the points are to the blue line, the better the agreement, and the darker black the color, the more dots there are. I would say that the agreement between the Versa 4 and the ECG chest strap is okay, though definitely not amazing. Overall, there are plenty of points close to the blue line, but there's also quite some points away from the blue line. We see especially many points below the blue line. There are some points below the blue line in the middle heart rate range right here, but especially in the higher heart rate range, we see many points below the blue line. You can see this whole blob of points right here below the blue line. But overall, I would say it looks okay. The correlation, this R value up here, is also decent at a value of 0.91. Now, the correlation cannot be higher than 1, so a correlation of 0.91 is quite okay. Now, we can see why that is if we actually look at the individual training sessions. And I'll start by showing you the best matching training session, which is displayed right here, followed by the worst agreeing session that the Versa 4 showed. Now, as I said, this is the best matching training session, and we have along the horizontal axis the time, and my heart rate is along the vertical axis. In blue-green, I plotted my heart rate according to the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, and in red is my heart rate according to the Versa 4. Now, as you can see, the two lines overlap quite okay most of the times, though sometimes still in the higher heart rate ranges, the Versa 4 detects a too low heart rate. And also here in the beginning, it failed to detect a dip in my heart rate. However, overall, this ride doesn't look too terrible. Now, this second example training session right here is the worst matching session. Now, as you can see, for this session, the Versa 4 almost always failed to pick up on the peaks in my heart rate. Only for this first training segment was it able to follow along with my heart rate. However, all the segments after that, it detected a way too low heart rate. So for this session, the Versa 4 was quite unreliable. And for the other training sessions, like this one right here, for instance, it performed somewhere in between, where the mismatch was not terrible, however also not great. However, let's put this into perspective by comparing it to 66 other watches I've tested over the last 2 years. Now, that overview is displayed right here. The correlation value I was talking about before is the metric I'll use for this, and that is displayed along the horizontal axis. And we want that value to be as close to 1 as possible. On the vertical axis, I ordered the watches from worst to best, so the more to the right and the higher a device is, the better is its correlation with the reference device. And I marked the Versa 4 in red right here. And as you can see, the Versa 4 is a medium performing heart rate tracker at best. Now there are worse watches out there, but it's also definitely not doing very well compared to many other watches. However, it's a bit difficult to see because of the sheer number of devices, so let's zoom in. Now that view is displayed right here, where I only show the watches with a correlation of 0.8 or higher. And as you can see, the Versa 4 is close in performance to, for instance, the Sense 2, which is a first indication that these two devices perform very similarly. The Fitbit Charge 5 is actually also quite close in performance. However, as I said, there are many better performing watches out there, including different Huawei watches and especially Apple watches. Interestingly though, the Pixel watch, which is also a watch made by Google, actually performs a lot better for this type of exercise. Overall, I would say that this means that the Fitbit Versa 4 is doing okay-ish when it comes to heart rate tracking for cycling indoors. However, there are many better watches out there, and it definitely has significant issues when it has to detect my peak in heart rate. So let's next take a look at another easy type of exercise for a watch to track, walking outside. Now here are the results for the first walk. Again, in blue-green are the measurements of the chest strap, and in red the Versa 4. As you can see, though there are definitely some deviations, overall, the Versa 4 is able to detect the general patterns in my heart rate. So this is looking quite okay, though again, I would not say it's looking great. And if we now take a look at the second walk, we actually see quite some more deviations between the Versa 4 and the ECG chest strap. And again, this somehow hints at the Versa 4 performing mediocre at best when it comes to heart rate tracking. However, I actually also took the Versa 4 with me on a hike here in Austria, which is potentially slightly more tricky for the watch, since I quite often use my hands to hold on to different things on the trail, potentially increasing the tension on my wrist. However, this actually doesn't look too terrible and generally conforms to what we saw for walking. It's mostly able to track my heart rate, but it does show significant deviations sometimes. And this is my heart rate for when I descended the mountain, and the Versa 4 actually did quite a lot better, so here it looks quite good, I would say. To make it even more tricky, I also tested the watch on a short interval run. Now for this interval run, we again see something that we also saw for the interval spinning sessions, where with changes in heart rate, the watch really struggles. So mostly at the peaks of my heart rate, but also sometimes at the dips of my heart rate, the watch really struggles to accurately detect my heart rate. It seems that sometimes it detects a too low and sometimes a too high heart rate, but it's definitely not super accurate. Next, let's take a look at an exercise which is generally more challenging, cycling outside. Now, while cycling outdoors, watches tend to shift a lot more on the wrist as well, making accurate heart rate readings much more difficult. To see if this affected the Versa 4, I tested it during a total of 7 bike rides. Now here you can see a similar overview plot to before, but now for biking outside. As you can see, the agreement with the ECG chest strap is downright terrible. There are many points away from the blue line, and especially many below the blue line right here. This means that the Versa 4 detected the wrong heart rate and mostly a too low heart rate a lot of the time. The correlation, this R value up here, is 0.5, and this is also pretty bad. And as before, we can see that in more detail if we actually take a look at some of the bike rides themselves. As you can see, the red line, which represents the Versa 4, detects a much lower heart rate than the ECG chest strap for a large part of the ride. And that is what we see for many bike rides, like this one right here as well. Now for parts of the ride, it does detect a heart rate that is close to the actual heart rate detected by the ECG chest strap. However, it fails to pick up on my higher heart rates for a large part of the ride as well, as you can see right here, but also right here. Now there are also some bike rides like this one right here where it really did terribly and it wasn't able to accurately detect my heart rate for most of the ride. Now this is the most clear example of that. For basically the entire ride, it kept detecting a way too low heart rate, so this is not looking very good for the Versa 4. We can again put this into perspective by looking at many of the other watches I've tested over the last years. Now similar to before, we'll use the correlation with the ECG chest strap as the value on the horizontal axis, and the better the agreement, the more to the top right the device is. As you can see, the Fitbit Versa 4, which is again marked in red, is really not doing very well compared to many other devices when it comes to heart rate tracking for cycling outside. Interestingly, it does about as well again as the Fitbit Sense 2, making me think that the hardware and software on both devices might be very similar. So far, I'm actually not that satisfied with the performance of the Versa 4. And at worst, these exercises represent only medium hard exercises for a watch to track your heart rate. So let's now move on to one of the most difficult exercises for a watch to track, weightlifting. Now, as I've mentioned previously, this is much more difficult because of the increased tension on my wrist and arm, making it much harder for the watch to get a clean heart rate signal. However, first a quick side note. If you're interested in the latest updates on the wearables I'm testing, I'm planning to start back up with my newsletter and posting more off-the-cuff things on my Instagram and my YouTube Shorts channel. So if you're interested in any of those are linked below. Of course, you would also make me really happy and it would help my efforts if you subscribe to this YouTube channel. But of course, this is totally up to you. Now, enough self-promotion. Let's take a look at the performance during weightlifting, which I tested during a total of 4 training sessions. Now here we can see an overview of that accuracy in a similar type of plot to before. I would say that the performance of the Fitbit Versa 4 again doesn't appear to be that great. Similar to what we saw in my review of the Fitbit Sense 2, we see that if my heart rate gets higher, the Versa 4 detects a too low heart rate. The correlation is also not very high at a value of 0.72. Now, if we now take a look at the individual training sessions, we see that the Versa 4 can detect my heart rate in between sets, but when my heart rate increases and I do a set, the Versa 4 is not able to pick up on this. You can see that the ECG chest strap picks up on my increased heart rate each time I do a set, so that's displayed here in blue, but the Versa 4 in red keeps detecting a low heart rate and doesn't detect any of these peaks. And that is basically what we see for all training sessions like this one right here. The Versa 4 keeps detecting my baseline heart rate and it fails to pick up on any of the peaks in my heart rate at all. Now let's again put this into perspective by comparing it to many of the other watches I've tested in the past. And we can see those results in this overview right here. And as you can see, relative to other watches, the Versa 4, again marked in red, is doing mediocre at best and is roughly in the middle of all the watches. Now, when we zoom in a bit and remove all watches with a correlation below 0.6, we can again see that the Versa 4 is not that far off from the Fitbit Sense 2. Again, making me think that these watches probably perform very similarly. However, it's also not that far off from the Fitbit Lux, the Fitbit Charge 5 and the Fitbit Charge 4. So overall, based on my initial testing, I would conclude that the Fitbit Versa 4 isn't a very good heart rate tracker. It does okay-ish while I'm spinning, however for most of the other exercises it doesn't do well at all, and it generally performs similar to the Fitbit Sense 2, which also wasn't that good. Therefore overall, I'd give the heart rate tracking of the Fitbit Versa 4 2 out of 5 stars. Now, as I mentioned before, my go-to devices for tracking heart rate are Apple Watches, and for Android some Huawei watches are quite good. So if you want to buy a smartwatch for heart rate tracking, I'd recommend either of those. Let's now move on to something that Fitbit has traditionally been very good at, sleep stage tracking. I showed you in a recent video that both the Fitbit Sense 2 and Google Pixel Watch, both of which are owned by Google, are pretty decent sleep stage trackers. Let's see if the Fitbit Versa 4 is similar in performance. To check if the Versa 4 can detect my sleep stages, I'll compare it to an EEG device called the Dream 2 that can actually measure my brain waves and has been shown to be relatively reliable at sleep stage tracking. Now here I show an overview of the sleep test results. For getting an overall impression of how well the Versa 4 performs, the Dream 2 should likely be good enough. However, the gold standard would be polysomnography, which you would also like to try in the Versa 4 in the future. Now on top here are the sleep stages as recorded by the EEG device, and on the left the sleep stages as recorded by the Versa 4. Now I wore both the EEG device and the Versa 4 to bed for 10 nights, and I will see how close the predictions of the Versa 4 are to those of the EEG device. And each column here sums to 100%, meaning that we can see what percentage of each of the sleep stages according to the Dream 2 was predicted as each sleep stage by the Versa 4. And if they perfectly agree, all values on the diagonal should be 100%. First of all, we see that about 85% of what was deep sleep according to the EEG device was also deep sleep according to the Versa 4, which is very good. When deep sleep according to the EEG device was predicted differently by the Versa 4, it was predicted as light sleep at about 14%. And we can actually see that based on the individual nights. On top here we have the sleep stages according to the Dream 2 EEG headband, with the clock time along the horizontal axis and the sleep stages on the vertical axis. On the bottom we have a similar plot, but now for the Fitbit Versa 4. I've highlighted all the EEG recorded deep sleep in purple right here. Now for this night we can indeed see that all the deep sleep detected by the EEG headband was also detected as deep sleep by the Versa 4. However, the Versa 4 also detected some extra deep sleep as well. Now this second example night also shows some good results, however the match is just slightly worse, with the Versa 4 not detecting all of the deep sleep that the Dream 2 detected, and also with some extra deep sleep detected again as well. And this is basically what we see for all nights, like this one right here. Most of the deep sleep according to the EEG device is also detected by the Versa 4, but often some extra deep sleep is detected as well. Light sleep agreement was also pretty good at about 74%, which is actually almost the exact same agreement that the Sense 2 also showed. And if the Versa 4 did disagree with the EEG device on light sleep, it mostly predicted deep sleep, though also quite sometimes some of the other sleep stages. Now REM sleep agreement was also quite okay at about a 59% agreement with the EEG device. And if it was predicted differently, it was mostly predicted as being light sleep at about 34%. And we can see that clearly based on the individual nights as well. Now this is a similar plot to before, but now with the REM sleep as measured by the EEG device marked in red. And again, I would say we see a pretty good agreement. However, the Versa 4 does tend to detect a bit less REM sleep this night. Additionally, near the end of the night, it detects more awake time, whereas the EEG device did not detect this. Now this second example night looks similar. There's generally a good overlap, though the Versa 4 tends to detect less REM sleep and also again more awake time. Still, I would say the agreement is generally pretty good, and because of that we can also see the sleep cycles based on just the data from the Versa 4, at least for this night. Now you go through roughly 4 to 6 sleep cycles each night, each one starting with light sleep and deep sleep, which is marked in blue, and each one ending in REM sleep, which is marked in red. And as you can see, I likely had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 complete sleep cycles for this night. And we are actually able to see most of these based on just the data from the Versa 4. The Versa 4 only missed this first REM sleep segment, so we can also not see the sleep cycle. And for this second example night, I would say it matches even a bit better, and one could potentially see all the sleep cycles based on just the data from the Versa 4, so this is not looking too bad at all. Awake detection also agreed well at about 77% agreement, which is again very similar to what we saw for the Fitbit Sense 2. And if there was any disagreement, this was mostly with light sleep at about 19%, which is somewhat expected since light sleep is the closest sleep stage to being awake. Now in general, the Versa 4 does tend to detect more and longer awake moments, as we also just saw when we were looking at REM sleep. However, there are also some nights, like this example night right here, where it matches quite well with the EEG device in terms of awake time, so this is quite good. However, there are also some nights with more disagreement, like this one right here, where I would say there's only a partial match between the awake moments detected by the EEG headband and the Versa 4. To put these results into context, we can compare the performance of the Versa 4 to that of 43 other watches I've tested in the past. Now this graph shows an overview of the agreement of different watches with the EEG device. Along the horizontal axis, we have the average agreement over the 4 individual sleep stages, and on the vertical axis, we have the agreement of the worst sleep stage. Now, the better the agreement, the more to the top right the device is, and as you can see, the best agreeing devices, so far at least, were different Apple Watches. In this case, the Apple Watch Series 7, Series 8, Apple Watch SE, and the Apple Watch Ultra. Other good devices do include different Fitbits, also Whoop straps and the Withing Sleep Analyzer, though all of these are not quite as good as the Apple Watches. If we now plot the Fitbit Versa 4 in the same plot, which is marked in red, we see it's very similar in performance to all the other Fitbit devices I tested in the past. It is particularly interesting that it performs similarly to the Sense 2, which we also saw for the heart rate tracking performance. However, it also performs similar to the Charge 5, Inspire 2 and the older Fitbit Sense 1. The Google Pixel Watch, which actually runs Fitbit software, also performs similarly. Now, based on these results, I would conclude that all Fitbit devices give you roughly the same performance when it comes to sleep stage tracking. So overall, the sleep stage tracking of the Versa 4 seems to be quite good, and it seems to do about the same as the very similar looking Fitbit Sense 2. Therefore, I would give the sleep stage tracking of the Versa 4 4 out of 5 stars. As I mentioned, only Apple Watches appear to perform better for tracking my sleep stages. However, the main benefit of the Versa 4 and also other Fitbits over the Apple Watch is that the Fitbit Versa 4 can track your naps, whereas the Apple Watch cannot do this. Let's now move on to another important feature of the Fitbit Versa 4, the location or GPS tracking. To test that, I tracked my route during a total of 6 bike rides while I was cycling to and from work, and I wanted to test 2 things. 1, how long does it take for the watch to get a GPS signal? And 2, how well the GPS signals overlap when cycling the same route several times. Now those results are displayed right here for 4 times I cycled to work, and I started the activity the moment I was ready to leave, and I did not provide the watch with any extra time to acquire the signal. Now I started all rides on this intersection right here. The green markers indicate the moment it connected the GPS signal, and as you can see, twice it got the signal after I cycled a few blocks, but the other 2 times it took quite a bit more time for it to acquire the GPS signal, as you can see right here. It also seems as though once it first has the signal, it needs some more time to get a more accurate signal. And you can see that especially strongly for this last signal it acquired right here. It really goes through some buildings before linking up with the other signals. Now, once it has the signal, the consistency is okay at best, I would say, though definitely not great. This is similar to what we saw for the Fitbit Sense 2, as you can also see near these sparks right here, for instance. And later in the ride, we also see quite a lot of deviation as well. So overall, this is not looking that great when it comes to GPS tracking accuracy. Now for cycling back from work, I only recorded 2 rides. The main thing I wanted to check is how quickly the signal was acquired. Now, as you can see, this time the signals were acquired quite quickly, so that's looking a bit better compared to what we saw before. Though I cannot say much based on just 2 rides, we do see that the signals deviate from the road quite a bit and quite often also go through buildings. We can also see right here near this church, for instance, that the lines really deviate a lot from the road that I was actually cycling on. Overall, I'm not impressed with the GPS tracking performance of the Versa 4, and the quality appears to be quite bad, honestly. It sometimes takes quite a while to lock onto my signal, and there's quite some deviation between the signals when I cycle the same route several times. Therefore, overall, I'd give the GPS tracking 2.5 out of 5 stars, which is the same mark I also gave to the Sense 2. Now, the next thing I tested on the Versa 4 is the step counting accuracy. To test the step counting accuracy, I went out and took exactly 8,000 steps with the Fitbit Versa 4. Now, I do not like counting 8,000 steps in my head, which is why I counted each step manually using this tally counter. Let's take a look at those results. Now here are the results for the first 4,000 steps, where I wore the Fitbit Versa 4 on my left arm. On the horizontal axis we have the time, and the total number of steps is counted on the vertical axis. Now this diagonal blue-green line represents the steps as counted by the Versa 4, and the blue vertical lines indicates the moments it should have counted 1,000 steps more. So the first blue line indicates where it should have counted 1,000 steps, the second 2,000, and so on. Now, as you can see, the Versa 4 was pretty consistent and generally very close to the steps it should have counted, though it did tend to count a bit more steps than it was supposed to, especially during the second and third segment. It counted quite some extra steps, though overall I would say it's not too bad at all. Now, I actually wore the new Fitbit Sense 2 at the same time, but on the other wrist, which is displayed here in the same plot in red. Now, both watches actually perform similarly and are pretty good, though the Versa 4 actually counted the steps slightly more accurately, ending up closer to the 4,000 steps it should have counted, though I did also wear them on different wrists, so that might have some influence. Now, I actually repeated this experiment and those results are displayed here. As you can see, though it was pretty close, the Versa 4 overcounted by quite a few more steps this time. Especially during this second segment, it counted close to 100 steps too many. Again, if we display the Sense 2 in red, we see that this performs more or less the same as the Versa 4, though it might just have counted a few more steps. Overall though, I would say that the watches seem to perform very similarly. So the step counting is looking quite okay, though the Versa 4 sometimes overcounts some steps. However, the next question is if the Versa 4 ever counts steps when it's not supposed to, for instance when doing activities that do not involve walking. Now those results are displayed right here for 5 activities on the vertical axis: walking, hiking, spinning, cycling, and weightlifting. On the horizontal axis is the number of steps per minute counted by the Versa 4 for each of these activities. Now ideally I would say it would count close to 0 steps during all of the activities that do not involve any type of walking or running. And as you can see, when I was walking, as is displayed here in purple, it mostly counted a normal walking pace at roughly 80 to 100 steps per minute. There was also this one time where it counted far fewer steps, though I suspect this was an auto-detected walk where I also stood still in between. Now when hiking displayed right here in a yellowish color, we see it counted just a few steps per minute less than while walking, which makes some sense as walking up and down a mountain takes quite some more care and effort, which probably results in a lower walking pace. Now, when spinning and cycling outside, it actually counted quite a few steps per minute as well, as you can see right here in green and red. It often counted between 30 and 35 steps per minute, which is quite a high number for activities that do not involve any walking at all. Now, if you think about it, 30 steps per minute actually means it counted 1 step per 2 seconds, which I feel is quite a lot. Now, while weightlifting, which is displayed here in blue, it also counted quite some steps, though not that many honestly. And these numbers are more in the realistic range of what I would expect for this type of exercise, because I am moving about the apartment a bit. So overall, the step counting performance of the Versa 4 is okay when I'm actually walking, though it does tend to count a few too many steps when you're not walking. Again, this is very similar to the Fitbit Sense 2. Therefore, overall, I'd give the step counting accuracy 3 out of 5 stars. Now, overall, the Fitbit Versa 4 did not impress me. Similar to the Sense 2, it did not really feel like an upgrade compared to previous generations. The heart rate tracking was honestly pretty bad, and the GPS tracking was also quite underwhelming. Now, the step counting was okay, though also not great, since it counted quite some steps when it was not supposed to. The only thing I can really recommend it for is for sleep stage tracking, which is something that Fitbits in general seem to be good at. Therefore, overall, I'd give the Fitbit Versa 4 3 out of 5 stars. Now, if the sleep stage tracking is your main focus, the Versa 4 is a decent choice, though other cheaper Fitbits will perform just as well, since even my old Fitbit Charge 2 seems to have similar performance. Now, if you want to buy a Fitbit, another device, or anything at all on Amazon for that matter, even something as small as toilet paper, and at the same time support the channel, there are different affiliate links in the description below that do not cost you any extra, and some even provide discounts. If you want to know more about the performance of the new Google Pixel Watch, check out this video right here. Or if you want to know more about the best watches on iOS, the Apple Watches, check out my complete reviews on these watches right here.